Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman have discussed the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. This was the third phone call over the crisis between Khan and the Saudi Crown Prince in the last 3 weeks. Khan told Mohammed about the worsening crisis in the occupied valley, which has been under Indian lockdown for the past 30 days. Earlier, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India's unilateral decision of revoking occupied Kashmir status is a regional security risk. The Foreign Minister said Pakistan's diplomatic efforts have actively sensitized the world to the Kashmir crisis. He said the UN, Human Rights Watch, the EU and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation are all discussing India's illegal move. Qureshi further said Prime Minister Imran Khan has communicated the gravity of the worsening humanitarian crisis to the several heads of the states. The foreign minister said in addition to Muslims, every minority is unsafe in Hindutva-ruled India. In the occupied Kashmir, the month-long lockdown by Indian forces has triggered food shortages. Kashmiris told undercover journalists the crushing curfew has created a medical emergency. The valley has now been cut off from the world by a communications blackout for 30 days. Millions of residents in Indian-occupied Kashmir are facing an acute shortage of food, medicine and medical treatment. Indian occupation forces have arrested 11,000 Kashmiri politicians, activists, journalists and civilians in less than a month. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Adil Al-Jubair is expected to visit Pakistan tomorrow to discuss the situation in Kashmir. India's crushing curfew and communications blackout has now entered its 30th day, where the clampdown has suspended all activity in the valley and cut off people from the rest of the world. How is the life in Kashmir during the current lockdown? For which, watch this report.
In the disputed region, which is currently under lockdown by the Indian government, simple communication is a major struggle. Kashmir has been under a communications blackout for 28 days since the government revoked its special status. As a result, millions of Kashmiris have been left with no access to the outside world. No internet, no cell phones, no landlines. Even post offices are not fully functional, with just a few letters leaving the region and little to none distributed within Kashmir itself. This local television channel is relaying messages from Kashmiris living outside the region in the hope their families will see them. Even marriage has been affected. Every day, local newspapers carry adverts announcing the cancellation of weddings. As a result of the crackdown, news from Kashmir is at a premium. The region's journalists face a challenge to file even basic reports. India's Supreme Court has ordered the government to respond to a legal challenge calling for an end to the blackout to allow for media reporting. Until then, the only reliable way to get back in touch with the world is to fly out of Kashmir.
Iran has ruled out direct negotiations with the U.S. addressing the country's parliament. President Hassan Rouhani says Tehran will counter U.S. pressure with active diplomacy instead of talks. The president says Tehran's strategy is to hold on to revolutionary patience and rationality. Rouhani said Washington set out to isolate Tehran, but its effective diplomacy is isolating the U.S. over the nuclear deal. Earlier, the U.S. President Donald Trump offered to meet Iranian leaders and hold bilateral talks with no preconditions. Iran says it will hold joint military exercises with Russia in the Indian Ocean, but Foreign Minister Javad Zarif did not say when the drills will be held. During his visit to Russia, Zarif said several other countries may join the exercises. Iran's foreign minister said these exercises are not aimed at third countries, but to maintain regional security. He said Tehran and Moscow have a similar vision on security in the Persian Gulf. Zarif said the Iran-Moscow security plan is based on cooperation, with the American idea of security is aggression and hostility. Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah has threatened Israel with missile strikes following recent clashes on the border with Lebanon. He says Hezbollah would attack targets along the border and deep inside Israel if it launched more cross-border attacks. In a televised speech, Nasrallah said the flare-up launched a new phase in which Hezbollah no longer has red lines. He said Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon would focus on intruding Israeli drones. 16 civilians have been killed and over 100 others injured in a blast near the Green Village complex in Kabul. The Taliban have claimed the responsibility, saying they were targeting foreign forces. The Interior Ministry says the blast was caused by a tractor parked with explosives parked beside a wall of the complex. The Taliban say the attack was coordinated because it was followed by fighters entering the complex to fight Afghan forces. U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad says Washington will withdraw 5,000 troops from Afghanistan. The move will mean the closure of 5 bases and is part of the draft peace treaty with the Taliban. 14,000 U.S. troops are currently stationed in the country. In an interview, Khalilzad said U.S. President Donald Trump will approve the deal before it can be signed. Earlier, Khalilzad shared the draft peace agreement with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. Ghani's spokesman Siddiqui says a ceasefire is part of the deal between the U.S. and the Taliban. He says President Ghani wants the U.S. to share details of the agreement with all Afghan leaders.
We hope that it will result to a ceasefire, it will result to a direct talks, and finally we could convince the Taliban to abandon violence against the Afghans. And absolutely, that will also lead us to a settlement.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo headed to Brussels to discuss the proposed Afghan peace deal with the chief of NATO. Now moving on, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has asked MPs not to vote for a Brexit delay, saying he does not want snap elections. But opponents of a no-deal Brexit are preparing to table a binding resolution in Parliament today. The ruling Tory rebels have joined forces with the opposition Labour Party to bring a bill designed to stop a no-deal Brexit. If passed, it will force Johnson to request a delay in Brexit until the end of January. But Prime Minister Johnson says the chances of a new deal being struck with the EU by October the 31st are rising. Speaking outside Number 10, Johnson said the UK will leave the EU on schedule, come what may.
I want everybody to know there are no circumstances in which I will ask Brussels to delay. We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts. We will not accept any attempt to go back on our promises or scrub that referendum. And armed and fortified with that conviction, I believe we will get a deal.
The government could call an election on October the 14th if the parliament passes the Brexit bloc bill. Now moving on, over 100 migrants have disembarked in Sicily after Italian police seized a German rescue ship. The vessel's captain, Klaus-Peter Reisch, says Mediterranean storms forced him to seek shelter in the port of Pozzallo. The vessel, Eleonore, waited 8 days to be granted safe harbor by Italian authorities. The Italian Coast Guard allowed the 31 remaining migrants aboard the ship to use another rescue ship to land on the island of Lampedusa. In the meantime, the Spanish Coast Guard has rescued 200 North African migrants attempting a dangerous crossing. Elsewhere, the Libyan Navy also picked up more than 100 migrants off the country's western coast. 25 bodies have been recovered after a scuba diving vessel sank when it was consumed by fire off an island in Southern California. The U.S. Coast Guard says a search operation is underway to look for 9 other missing passengers. The 75-foot commercial diving boat erupted in flames near the shoreline of Santa Cruz Island. Santa Barbara County Sheriff Bill Brown said 39 people were on board when the fire broke out. 5 of the diving boat's crew escaped the blaze. Authorities say the cause of the fire is so far unknown. In Mexico, 5 people have been killed after gunmen attacked a bus station in the city of Cuernavaca. Morelos state authorities say the shooting was targeted and part of a turf war between rival drug cartels. Officials say the gunmen killed 3 passengers on a bus, one in the waiting area and another in a bathroom. Authorities say Morelos is the epicenter of a turf war between at least 5 narcotics gangs. Over 250,000 people have been killed in drug wars since 2006. Mexico's army has been fighting the cartels for 13 years. Five people have died after Hurricane Durian hit the Bahamas. In the meantime, mass evacuations are underway in nearby states on the U.S. East Coast. The International Red Cross says some 13,000 houses have been damaged or destroyed in the Bahamas. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says Durian has weakened to Category 3 as it pummeled in the island chain with winds of 125 miles per hour. Bahamian officials say the Abacos Island are underwater after being inundated by storm surges as high as 23 feet. Prime Minister Hubert Minnis says the hurricane is a tragedy for the archipelago.
The Royal Bahamas Police Force has confirmed that there are 5 deaths in Abaco. We are in the midst of a historic tragedy in parts of northern Bahamas. Our mission and focus now is search, rescue, and recovery.
The U.S. states of Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas have all declared states of emergency. U.S. weather forecasters say Durian will keep thrashing the Bahamas throughout this week. Moving on, Brazil has reached out to Norway and Germany for help in putting out thousands of wildfires in the Amazon rainforest. The 2 European states last month discontinued financial aid to Brazil over deforestation. Berlin and Oslo suspended funding in protest at the increased destruction of Brazil's rainforests. The move did not go down well with President Jair Bolsonaro, but Environment Minister Ricardo Salles says talks on the resumption of aid are progressing. The Bolsonaro administration earlier admitted it does not have the resources to put out the fires. Indigenous tribes living deep within the Amazon are faced with an existential crisis. The choking smoke is also causing breathing disorders among the Amazon's children. It's a time for a short break, but coming up next in the Bulletin. Militants sow death and fear in northern Mozambique. (1,187 drug-related deaths last year. Welcome back. In China, 8 primary school children have been stabbed to death in a knife attack in central Hubei province. Police have arrested a 40-year-old male suspect at the crime scene. Police say 2 of the survivors are being treated for life-threatening injuries. The attack took place on the first day of the school in Shangyapo village of Hubei. China's state media says the authorities have not yet shared the motive of the attack. It says the suspect is an ex-convict who was released in May after serving an 8-year sentence. Bangladesh has suspended mobile phone services for the 1 million Rohingyas living in refugee camps in Cox's Bazar. The move follows the killing of a 4th Rohingya accused of murdering a ruling party politician last month. Bangladesh Telecommunication Authority says mobile operators have been given a week to implement the ban. Rohingya leaders say the mobile service ban will disrupt communications between refugee camps. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia laid down their arms in 2016, but its former members are still far from leading healthy and prosperous lives. More in this report.
The The 5-decade-long conflict, which claimed the lives of almost 300,000 people, came to an end when the rebels signed a peace deal. That deal was signed in 2016 with former President Juan Manuel Santos. The guerrillas agreed to disarm in return for promises of reintegration into society, economic benefits, and political representation in Congress. But many still fear for their lives and are concerned the present government isn't doing enough for their reintegration into society.
La preocupación más grande es
The greatest concern is for life, to guarantee lives because they're killing people not just in reintegration process but also hundreds of social activists. People fighting for their rights, fighting for their reidentifications, and that is why they're seen as targets. In second place, the implementation of the peace agreement that needs to have a guarantee to life.
y en segundo lugar
Current President Ivan Duque has opposed many aspects of the peace deal and unsuccessfully tried to make amendments via Congress. He has asked for tougher punishments for ex-rebels who committed war crimes. Some 14,000 ex-guerrillas are in the reincorporation process, with a quarter living in 24 reintegration camps. The UN says 137 ex-combatants have been killed since the deal was signed, leaving many afraid for their lives outside the camps. UN figures show just 10% of ex-guerrillas have been granted credit for farming and development projects.
One starts to lose faith in the credibility of the peace process from the state. I have faith in the decisions that were taken at the beginning, the fight for peace, to find a way to build a stable and durable peace.
A dissident movement is another growing concern. A group of former rebels announced a new offensive in late August as a reaction to failures in the peace process. The government says it will extend a monthly $200 stipend to ex-combatants until December 31st. But this could be too little, too late.
The United Nations has condemned rising violence across Nigeria and the lack of accountability for perpetrators. The UN Special Rapporteur, Ans Kalamat, says Nigeria needs to take urgent action to end the violence. Presenting her findings in Abuja, Kalamat said Nigeria is a pressure cooker of internal conflict. She said the country requires change in its judiciary, police and military for people to stop resorting to violence. Kalamat said Nigeria's failure to address the situation could destabilize other West African countries. Nigeria is currently facing multiple conflicts, including tribal wars and attacks by the terrorist group Boko Haram. Cabo Delgado in the north of Mozambique is one of the country's poorest regions. It is also the site of the little-known insurgency that has been sowing terror for close to 2 years. Watch how the people are leading their lives in fear.
Burnt-out houses, food supplies reduced to ash, and villagers left hungry and fearing for their lives. For nearly 2 years now, the residents of the North Mozambican province of Cabo Delgado have been living in fear of attacks.
They came out of nowhere and burnt my house. Now we live with nothing. We have nothing left. We live like this now.
The attacks are unclaimed, and those who carry them out remain largely unidentified.
I don't know who they were. It was night, but I can tell you that there were a lot of them. They were young people, and women too.
Over 300 people have died in these attacks since October 2017. Many of the survivors have since fled, like Ayuba and his family, to seek refuge with relatives who live elsewhere. 6 people live in this hut, a family wrenched away from the fields that normally provide their livelihood.
I urge the government to do all it can to put a stop to this war, so that we can get back to a normal life.
Local authorities say they are concerned by the situation and are doing all they can to secure the region. But for the Bishop of Pemba, that is not enough. He recently published a letter criticising the government for its lack of action and communication.
Say who they are, show them, and act to stop the attacks. This is our request, that the authorities go deep because the poor are dying.
The Islamic State group claimed 2 of the attacks that have taken place in 2019, but police and security experts doubt the veracity of these claims.
The latest tourist destination in Spain might be a cave. What sets this one apart is that it simulates an underground Martian colony. For a Martian experience on Earth, watch this report.
Scientists say if humans are ever to colonize Mars, they'll have to live underground to survive its hostile terrain. But what would such a life be like? You can find out if you visit Astroland's Ares station in Spain's Cantabrian Mountains, where scientists and architects have turned a cave into a Martian colony simulator.
An adventure, honestly, something totally different from what you find outside in your day-to-day, an experience that totally takes you out of your comfort zone. It is another world. You have to adapt, change your mindset, and everything that is ordinary, you have to learn how to do it differently from what you used to do on Earth.
The Ares station isn't something anyone can just jump into. Participants undergo 26 days of online courses, followed by 3 days of intense training before they're allowed to enter the cave. A maximum of 10 people can participate in each mission, which lasts 4 days.
I feel absolutely great. It was a super great experience to be on Mars for 4 days. We were in a cave now, and then we always had those great moments every day where you went on an EVA. It's called an extravehicular activity, where you go out of the habitat where we were sleeping in, and then you were going out in the cave, and it just looked like Mars.
You may not have to wait long if you want to experience actual space travel, as this June NASA announced it would be opening the International Space Station to tourists in 2020.
Close in the highs of the business world now, European stock markets have opened lower over uncertainty about Britain's exit from the EU. Investor sentiment was also hit by the latest escalation in the trade war between the US and China. London's FTSE 100 is flat after the pound fell to its lowest since January 2017 on the fears of snap elections. Frankfurt's DAX and the CAC in Paris are trading about 0.5% down. Asian bourses struggled after China complained to the World Trade Organization about US punitive tariffs. The Shanghai Composite closed marginally higher, with Tokyo's Nikkei 225 was unchanged. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index lost nearly 0.5%. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.